Behind the grand doors of Britain's creepiest houses lie violent secrets and blood curses. Inheriting these cursed homes means inheriting an absolute nightmare. Today, we step inside 8 of the most haunted spots. Location number 1. The Caged House, St. Osyth. Known locally as The Cage, this imposing 16th century property on Colchester Road is widely regarded as ground zero for the most aggressive, physical, spiritual curse in England. Originally operating as a brutal medieval holding prison before being controversially converted into a residential home, the property bears a violent ancestral hex and a deeply unsettling technological anomaly. The primary source of this terrifying curse is deeply rooted in the infamous St. Osyth witch trials of 1582. The cold stone building was actively used as a grim holding cell to chain, mercilessly starve, and ruthlessly torment 13 accused women. Amongst them was Ursula Kemp, a local healer who was locked in heavy iron manacles inside this very house before eventually being dragged to the gallows and hanged. The intense, suffocating agony and the dying, bitter curses of these condemned women permanently saturated the stone foundations. This historical brutality was chillingly verified in 1921, when 2 female skeletons, bound tightly with heavy iron rivets, a macabre medieval practice designed to physically pin down the corpses of witches, were unearthed nearby. This ancient curse strikes modern residents with terrifying physical brutality. The cursed house achieved national notoriety through a former owner, Vanessa Mitchell, who purchased the property in 2004. According to her deeply disturbing accounts, the house subjected her to relentless, absolute terror. Mitchell was violently shoved down the steep wooden stairs while heavily pregnant, and frequently slapped in the face by invisible, malicious forces in the dead of night. The psychological curse of the cage was incredibly toxic. It induced sudden, crippling suicidal depression in its occupants, a suffocating despair that instantly vanished the moment they stepped outside the front door. Terrified for her life, Mitchell finally fled the house in 2007, leaving it as a notorious, empty real estate pariah. Today, the cursed atmosphere acts as a bizarre, aggressive technical hazard. Investigators from the BBC have verified that visitors stepping into the original cell area experience an acute, sickening tightening of the throat and sudden panic attacks. Furthermore, the property exhibits a terrifying, undeniable technical hex. Professional cameras and modern smartphones suffer instant, total battery drainage within mere seconds of crossing the threshold. Memory cards routinely suffer permanent, catastrophic hardware failure, or are returned entirely wiped of all data once removed, conclusively proving that the residual, ancient energy here actively despises and destroys modern electronic observation. Location number 2. Queensberry House, Edinburgh. Situated on the historic Canongate in the dark heart of Edinburgh, Queensberry House is completely saturated by one of the most horrific, macabre tragedies in Scottish history. Behind its grand, aristocratic facade lies an unspeakable, bloody secret that has permanently cursed the grounds. This is a property where immense wealth and noble titles could not contain the absolute madness that festered within the family bloodline. In the 18th century, the second Earl of Queensberry resided here, desperately attempting to manage a deeply shameful family secret. The Earl had a son, James Douglas, who was heavily incarcerated deep within the property because he suffered from violent, uncontrollable periods of violent, homicidal insanity. He was kept hidden away from polite society, securely locked in a darkened room, while his family maintained their aristocratic facade. However, on one catastrophic, fateful day in 1707, Whilst the entire household was distracted by political riots sweeping the city, the mad son managed to break free from his confinement. Roaming the empty halls in a state of absolute, bloodthirsty frenzy, he eventually wandered into the grand kitchens. There, he cornered a young, terrified kitchen boy who had been left behind. In an act of unparalleled, monstrous cruelty, the insane heir violently overpowered the child, bound him tightly, and forced him onto a heavy metal roasting spit. He then casually roasted the innocent boy alive over the roaring kitchen fire. When the horrified staff finally returned, they were met with a scene of absolute, sickening carnage. Since that grim day, a foul, unshakable curse has clung to Queensberry House. Long after the original kitchens were remodeled, visitors and staff frequently report the sudden, overpowering, and deeply nauseating scent of charring meat flooding the empty corridors. The terrifying paranormal activity is heavily concentrated around the site of the ancient hearth. The sorrowful, blackened phantom of the young kitchen boy has been distinctly seen desperately wandering the lower levels, eternally trapped in the exact location of his agonizing, fiery demise. It is a chilling reminder that the creepiest houses in Britain are often haunted not by ancient monsters, but by the horrific, unfiltered cruelty of the privileged upper class. Location number 3. Breamore House, Hampshire. Nestled in the idyllic, rolling countryside of Hampshire, Breamore House stands as a magnificent, Elizabethan stately home. Yet, beneath its pristine historical beauty lies a tragic, multi-generational curse that has utterly devastated the Doddington family. This grand estate is heavily haunted by a suffocating aura of grief, sudden madness, and a highly specific, vindictive hex that violently lashes out from beyond the grave. The terrifying legacy of Breamore House dates back to the 17th century, centering heavily on the tragic elder Mrs. Doddington. Her life unraveled into absolute despair when her husband, facing utter financial ruin after a critical lawsuit did not go in his favor, tragically took his own life. Consumed by an inescapable, suffocating grief, Mrs. Doddington simply faded away in the grand halls, her heart completely broken by the horrific scandal. Her sorrowful, lingering spirit is now permanently bound to the blue bedroom, where her sudden, spectral appearance is universally dreaded as a grim, undeniable portent of sudden death or severe illness for the current owners. But the dark tragedy of the Doddington bloodline did not end with her broken heart. In a horrific twist of fate, her own daughter was later brutally murdered by her own son, Mrs. Doddington's grandson, during a sudden, violent fit of madness, further soaking the ancient floorboards in familial blood. However, the most dangerous, aggressive aspect of this cursed property revolves around a terrifying deathbed hex. As the elder Mrs. Doddington lay dying, consumed by bitterness, she placed a powerful, malevolent curse on a specific, grand oil portrait of herself. She fiercely vowed that absolute doom would fall upon anyone who dared to move her painted likeness from its chosen resting place. For centuries, this threat was dismissed as a macabre fairy tale. That is, until the 1950s, when an unsuspecting man, tasked with cleaning the historic house, casually took the heavy picture down. Almost immediately, he suffered a horrific, unexplainable fall, violently snapping his leg. The portrait has rarely been touched since, serving as a permanent, chilling warning that the dead of Breamore House forcefully demand to be left exactly where they are. Location number 4. Chavenage House, Gloucestershire. Chavenage House is a breathtakingly beautiful Elizabethan manor in Gloucestershire, constructed from striking grey stone. But this grand estate is violently overshadowed by one of the most terrifying, dramatic death omens in all of British folklore. It is a property deeply scarred by political betrayal, a daughter's absolute fury, and a permanent, fiery curse that shatters the quiet countryside. The dark history of this creepiest house revolves entirely around Colonel Nathaniel Stevens, a prominent member of Parliament during the tumultuous English Civil War. When King Charles I was ultimately defeated and sentenced to death, Stevens faced immense pressure from Oliver Cromwell to sign the monarch's fatal death warrant. After agonizing hesitation, Stevens reluctantly placed his signature on the bloody document. However, his loyalist daughter was absolutely consumed by rage upon learning of his treason. She fiercely confronted her father in the Grand Hall and placed a devastating, venomous curse upon him for bringing the family name into eternal disrepute. The terrifying power of her hex was immediate and absolute. Within mere days of the king's execution, Colonel Nathaniel Stevens suddenly fell inexplicably, violently ill, and died in absolute agony. When his mourning family and associates congregated at the cursed house to pay their final respects, a terrifying paranormal event unfolded. As the mourners stood outside, the distinct, heavy sound of an approaching carriage echoed through the estate. A phantom coach, pulled by entirely black, spectral horses, materialized from the mist. The ghost of Nathaniel Stevens was distinctly seen slowly walking out of the front doors and climbing into the doomed carriage. The terrified crowd found themselves completely paralyzed, frozen in absolute horror, unable to move a single muscle as they watched the macabre scene unfold. When the phantom coach had traveled exactly 100 yards from the manor doors, it suddenly, violently burst into roaring flames, accompanied by the blood-curdling, agonized screams of the damned. Instantly, the crowd's supernatural paralysis ceased, leaving them hysterical with fright. To this day, the terrifying, fiery phantom coach is still frequently seen or heard racing towards the house, acting as a grim, permanent omen of bad luck and impending tragedy for the estate.
Location number 5. Testwood House, Hampshire.
Hidden away in Southampton, Testwood House is a grim, suffocating monument to obsessive love, brutal betrayal, and a horrific, bloody murder that permanently corrupted the atmosphere. Unlike grand castles haunted by fallen kings, the dark entity trapped within this creepiest property was born from a violent, intimate crime of passion, proving that the most terrifying curses are often forged by ordinary, desperately wicked people. According to deeply unsettling historical local accounts, the terrifying haunting of Testwood House centers on a tragic Victorian love affair. A man, described in historical records simply as a coachman, enjoyed a passionate, secret affair with the cook of the house, a young woman renowned for her striking beauty. However, his love rapidly mutated into a sick, jealous obsession. One fateful night, a dark spark of absolute wickedness ignited within him. Terrified that she might eventually leave him, he decided to violently take the young girl's life in order to exclusively, permanently retain her affections in death. He cunningly lured her up to an isolated, freezing attic room at the very top of the house. There, in the suffocating darkness, he brutally ended her life. In a frantic, desperate attempt to dispose of the horrific evidence, the murderer mercilessly dragged her motionless, bleeding body down the steep, narrow back stairs. He unceremoniously threw her broken corpse into a cold, damp alleyway directly opposite the residence, leaving her to rot in the shadows. For over 200 years, Testwood House has been heavily cursed by the violent, residual echoes of this atrocity. The scene of the crime permanently resounds with the horrifying, distinct noises associated with the murder. Terrified guests frequently report hearing sudden, heavy thuds, desperate wails,
frantic footfalls, and a macabre, sickening dragging sound slowly descending the back stairs in the dead of night. But the cook did not just leave an auditory echo. Sometime in the 1800s, her terrifying specter revealed itself entirely in a guest room, wearing a look of absolute, extreme malevolence. She remains trapped, an intensely angry, vengeful spirit demanding justice for a violently stolen life.
Location number 6. Eastbury House, Dorset. Located near Blandford Forum, the sprawling estate of Eastbury House was once a symbol of immense, unfathomable wealth. Today, however, it is heavily regarded as one of the creepiest haunted locations in Dorset, permanently scarred by a tragic tale of deep deception, crippling paranoia, and a violent suicide that tore a hole directly into the spiritual realm. The macabre curse of Eastbury House began with George Bubb, the incredibly wealthy owner of the original estate. Due to his extensive political duties in London, Bubb hired a local estate manager named William Doggett to meticulously maintain his grand home and manage his vast finances. However, Doggett was deeply corrupt. Over a prolonged period, he successfully succeeded in embezzling massive, life-altering sums of money from his absent employer, secretly bleeding the estate dry. Eventually, Bubb grew highly suspicious of his rapidly dwindling fortunes. He abruptly informed Doggett via letter that he was returning home immediately to thoroughly inspect his financial accounts. Consumed by absolute, suffocating terror, and knowing that his extensive crimes were about to be brutally exposed, Doggett simply could not face the horrific consequences. Retreating to a quiet, isolated room within the grand house, he raised a heavy pistol to his head and violently shot himself, choosing a bloody, agonizing death over public disgrace and the gallows. His violent, desperate suicide permanently cursed the surrounding grounds. Since that fatal day, the terrifying specter of William Doggett has been continuously witnessed. His ghostly figure is frequently seen nervously walking from the shadowy house towards the nearby town of Tarrant-Gunville. Midway through his spectral journey, a terrifying phantom coach and horses suddenly appears from the mist to pick him up. As the carriage violently speeds off into the night, the ghostly coachman can be heard laughing maniacally, a blood-curdling sound that echoes across the empty fields. In a secondary, equally disturbing variant of the haunting, Doggett's heavy, spectral footsteps are heard disembarking from a carriage at the front doors. The invisible entity slowly, deliberately walks to the exact room in which he committed suicide, culminating in the deafening, horrific sound of a phantom gunshot that continuously traumatizes anyone unfortunate enough to hear it.
Location number 7. Medieval Merchant's House, Southampton. Tucked away on French Street in Southampton, the Medieval Merchant's House is a beautifully preserved piece of history. But as the sun sets, this historic, timber-framed property violently sheds its charming facade, revealing a deeply cursed, suffocating atmosphere heavily saturated by greed, illicit affairs, and a brutal, bloody murder. The most terrifying, lingering entity in this house is known simply as the Shadowy Woman. She is frequently witnessed silently pacing the creaking wooden corridors in the dead of night. Most alarmingly, she has been repeatedly observed by terrified staff and visitors staring longingly, almost obsessively, down the dark, ancient well on the property, as if desperately searching for something lost to the cold, black water below. Historians and paranormal investigators firmly believe this shadowy specter is the restless, guilty ghost of a woman named Ruth Dill. In the 1890s, Ruth worked in the building when it functioned as a busy, rough lodging house for passing sailors. Desperate for money, she secretly acquired extra illicit income by sleeping with the wealthy men who rented rooms there. However, her greed eventually escalated to absolute violence. Late one evening, she attempted to quietly rob a particularly wealthy sailor while he slept. The man suddenly awoke and caught her red-handed, pilfering his valuable jewelry. In a moment of sheer, panicked brutality, Ruth grabbed a heavy, solid iron fire poker from the hearth and viciously struck him across the head. The devastating blow shattered his skull, killing him instantly on the floorboards. Knowing she would hang for murder, Ruth frantically gathered the stolen, blood-stained jewelry and desperately hurled it straight down the deep well to hide the evidence, before fleeing into the foggy Southampton harbor, never to be seen alive again. Today, her permanently trapped, sorrowful spirit is entirely unable to escape the scene of her horrific crime. She remains eternally tethered to the medieval merchant's house, a cursed, shadowy phantom forever looking down into the black water, desperately searching for the cursed treasure that cost a man his life and damned her soul for eternity.
Location number 8. Ye Olde Mint House, Pevensey. Located on the High Street in East Sussex, Ye Olde Mint House is unquestionably one of the most aggressively cursed, terrifying properties in the United Kingdom. This ancient, sprawling building is completely saturated in extreme, medieval cruelty, harboring a history so sickeningly violent that its horrific echoes regularly manifest in the physical world to deeply traumatize the living. The absolute darkest chapter of this creepiest house unfolded in the year 1586. The wealthy owner of the property suddenly returned from a long journey, only to discover his beautiful young mistress in bed with another man. Consumed by a wave of blinding, psychopathic rage, his retribution was unspeakably monstrous. He violently manacled the terrified girl to the heavy stone walls. In a horrifying act of mutilation, he brutally cut out her tongue so she could not scream. He then forced the bleeding, helpless woman to watch as he violently murdered her lover, binding him and literally roasting him alive over a roaring open fire. To complete his horrific revenge, he locked the mutilated girl in a hidden room, leaving her to die a slow, agonizing death of absolute starvation. Today, this house is heavily haunted by the horrifying, trapped specter of the murdered mistress. She is frequently seen wandering the shadowy building, dressed in a traditional Elizabethan ruff and a tight, restrictive bodice. Her terrifying face is constantly seen staring pleadingly out of the upper windows. Most chillingly, her phantom is often observed desperately running from the building in absolute silent panic, with a horrific torrent of spectral blood actively running from her mutilated mouth. As if this macabre haunting were not terrifying enough, the cursed house also harbors a second, deeply disturbing echo. The frantic, blood-curdling screams of a terrified baby are sometimes heard violently echoing down the main stairwell. This horrifying auditory phenomenon is believed to harken back to a later period when the building operated as a rough inn, where a desperate, maddened barmaid allegedly threw her own unwanted child down the wooden stairs to its death. Ye Olde Mint House is not just a haunted house. It is a terrifying, permanent monument to absolute human depravity. If you survived these cursed halls and want to uncover more of history's darkest secrets, hit that subscribe button right now. Which haunted British location should we explore next? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, thanks for watching History Legends Docs.